Welcome back to the channel. I'm Travis.
I'm Jake. And I'm Chris. And today we're going to answer some of your questions.
Okay, today we're going to be looking at some of the questions from online. 39 Ranger asked, I would really like to see a list of materials used from start to finish, starting with bare metal all the way to cut and final buff.
Well, for our list of materials, we'll make a list and Tim will run it through right about now. And because there's just too many to try to list off the top of our head. Yeah, you can see how fast this is going by. It's a pretty big list. There's a lot of things we use in here. A lot of things.
I mean, it can vary anywhere from starting out doing metalwork, 36 grit grinding disc, to final sand. We end up with 8,000 grit sandpaper before we buff.
Yeah, that's a good point. So that's 36 grit, 60 grit, 80 grit, probably 120 grit, 180 grit, then your 220s to your 400 to get prepared for your paint, and then you're cutting clear with 600, 800 grit, 1,000 grit, 1,500 grit, 2,000 grit, 3,000, all the way, like you said, up to 8,000 before we buff it. So that all those grits of sandpaper are, that list alone is a big list. So yeah, not to mention like file belts, compounds, stuff like that. You know, it's just a lot of stuff we use.
Okay, next question. Along with what Mr. Ranger listed, I'd like to see some of the tools you used when sanding down the car, the different sanding blocks you use, sanding paper grit, and in what stages.
I've got some blocks over here. Show a little example and grab it. So we get acrylic sheets and we like to cut our own blocks of varying sizes, thicknesses, stiffness. You know, we got one that's a little under a ½ inch, and we got some for clear sanding that are 1/16 inch, just so we can get conforms. Obviously, these are all for small areas. Travis has the ones that we use for large quarters, say on a 55 Chevy that's got a long, flat side. That way we can get a really nice straight, flat everything. And they're pretty thick, so yeah, depending what we're doing is what we use for the blocks. A lot of guys like to use the Durablocks, and they're great too, but these will give you really flat finishes. So this is what we tend to go to.
Yeah, we hand cut every one we need. They're not always square, rectangle, whatever. We make different shapes, sizes. We use acrylic a lot. We use it as our sanding blocks. We use it as a gapping tool when we're doing body work to get nice clean door gaps. It's kind of turning into a universal product for us in the body shop. Handles is a debate. A lot of us have started using duct tape, Gorilla Tape. You can put on some layers, turn it into a handle. Works pretty good. A couple of the guys are trying to make handles. It's kind of up in the air, depending on how you make your handle. Every thickness is going to give you a different forming capabilities. So if you put a solid handle on here, you're not going to get the flex out of this piece. It'll turn it into this piece that doesn't really flex. So there's a lot of variants, a lot of different ways to do it. We're still kind of learning, but our system is acrylic, mainly duct tape handles.
Yeah, it keeps it flexible, and it works. And on the bigger ones, it's harder to put rigid handles because you'll end up with just the 2 pressure points, you know, and then you're not having the pressure even across your block, and you could run into cutting grooves and lines in the panel that you don't want to. So duct tape seems to be the best, in our opinion. That's what we like to use. You can grab it anywhere.
This may be the most boring question you get, but it's probably one of the most important. How do you manage the sanding dust? What steps are involved in final clean before paint for both car and booth?
Sanding dust, that's a problem. It gets everywhere. It's a fine, pasty dust that gets carried away by every movement. Somebody walking through, opening a door, whatever breeze. It's going to blow it everywhere. We like to use vacuums and everything and clean up as much as we can in the car before we put it through final paint. Obviously, we're going to blow the car out, you know, outside. We're going to just blow out every cavity we can, vacuum out all the floor pans that we can, and really just, I mean, There's no way to manage the dust. You
Yeah.
just got to work around it.
Yeah, you got to make sure to try to capture as much as you can.
Where we benefit a little is our body shop kind of closes off to the rest of the shop. So we try to contain it, but sometimes you just can't.
It's everywhere.
Can make a real mess. And yeah, like he said, there are vacuum systems out there you can buy, but even those aren't. There's no way to keep it from getting everywhere.
Yeah, it's
So-
gonna go.
So before paint, we really like to just blow the cars out real good, vacuum out what we can before we blow them, so we make less mess. But yeah, then we wipe them down with wax and grease remover, shove it in the booth, and let Dan mask it up, do his thing.
Duke Car Guy asked, do y'all recommend putting filler over sanded epoxy after blasting or bare metal, or unsanded epoxy? Love the shop guys and YouTube clips.
Prep everything.
Yes.
You want a good mechanical adhesion. We usually like to epoxy things, then sand that, because when you spray the epoxy, it'll get down into every little crevice. And then when you prep over that, like I said, it gives you a good mechanical adhesion for any fillers or primers that you will put on afterwards.
What's Dad cooking? 6320 asks. Once you get a car down to bare metal, what do you do next? How do you keep the metal from flash rusting?
Kind of goes with the prior question. And freshly blasted cars come right in. We blow them out to get all the media blast material out of them, and we wipe them down right away, and we send them right to the booth, and we epoxy them and seal them up as quick as possible. Because you really don't want that bare metal sitting around. And then, like he said, you prep that epoxy coating for every subsequent coating that comes next.
Okay, next question. How long does it take to have the skills of sheet metal work, English wheel, etc.?
Depends how much patience you have.
Yes.
All of us have been doing it a while, so
It's a philosophical debate, really, because the adage is to go past amateur status. What is it, 10,000 hours? 10,000 hours. You do 10,000 hours of this or that. So I mean, that's a lot of time. So hopefully you're putting in your due diligence. But I'm not going to say that everybody's going to get out of it what you're going to get out of it. Whereas as some guys can put a few thousand hours in and really be in and into it and knowledgeable, and they really soak it up, and it means they just get it and they just understand. But if you're a guy that it's slow going for you, just stay at it, and like I said, a couple thousand hours later you'll have all the skills you want.
yeah, we're on.
The repetition.
Yeah.
That's really the main way you're going to learn any of this trade, is you just do it and keep doing it. To me, the easiest way to learn is to mess up.
Yeah, don't be afraid of mistakes. Own them.
It happens.
Yeah.
That's the best way. You'll know when somebody messes up in the shop, because usually it's a few choice words. Get over it, go right back and fix it and figure it out. Figure out what went wrong. Why did the metal move this way instead of that way? Sometimes you may not even know, but you did this and it didn't work. So now you've learned, hey, let's try to stretch it instead of shrink it. Practice. That's all I can say.
If you're passionate about it, you'll put in the work it takes to let your work shine.
Yeah, and if you are passionate about it, 10,000 hours goes by like that. So, before you know it, you're going to know what you're doing. Or at least what not to do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you got to learn a lot of what not to do before you know what to do.
I would like to have an explanation on how you finish your welds from the grind sandpaper you use, and why you sometimes hit your welds with a hammer and dolly, and how do you line up your sheet metal so that it is perfectly aligned?
So when we'll go, I'll start with the MIG weld. All right. So if we're putting in a small patch and we do MIG weld it, we typically don't hammer and dolly that. For grinding that down, the MIG weld leaves a little bit of a lump on your panel, right? So we'll start with a 36 or 60 grit grinding disc, or even a belt file. You'll start to take that weld down. Before you get it completely flat, you want to switch to a slightly lighter grit, because you don't want to leave those harsh grind marks in your panel. If you leave them harsh grind marks in the panel and you mud over that, a lot of times it'll swell back and it'll show in your finished product. So we typically try to finish our metal work to 80 grit. At 80 grit, we feel that's sufficient enough. Our mud will stick to it, our epoxy will stick to it, primer, well, we don't 80 grit and then prime, but So yeah, once we get close, we finish it with 80 grit and body work it out. For TIG welds,
TIG welds, you're talking whole different weld. Your MIG welds are really hard and brittle. You go a hammer and a dolly on them. Not saying you can't, but you run way more of a chance of having a failure around your weld or the weld itself because it's so brittle. A TIG weld is really soft. If you get a really nice TIG weld, there's a lot of times you can hammer and dolly the weld flat and almost not even have to take a grinder to it. It makes life a lot easier on the metal finish side. The weld being softer grinds and sands a lot nicer. And what else?
we typically hammer and dolly though, because when you introduce the heat to your panels, it will warp a little bit. So that's why we hammer and dolly, is to get that metal as straight as possible, because you don't want to just abuse the filling.
Yeah, to get your metal perfectly aligned, I mean, it really just comes down to your level of patience and how picky are you, and do you know what shapes you have and what shapes you're working with, your thickness of material, are your lines straight? It's really, that gets into that 10,000 hours. Somebody that doesn't have that experience is probably going to have a slightly bigger gap, or their panels aren't going to be perfectly flush, but then somebody who's farther on down the road, they can get that perfect hairline gap and perfect penetration on their weld, and like Travis was saying, make it to where your TIG weld, you barely even need any hammer and dollying, and you finish it like really smooth, you know. So again, like I said, it really comes down to how picky you are, and how far are you willing to go to get your panels aligned, really. That's the question there.
A good quick reference video that you could refer back to is the 68 Mustang that Travis fit the marker lights in the quarter panel.
Oh, yeah.
That would be a good example, because the way he did that is he cut the panel a little larger and slowly worked down to a more manageable size, and then cut the two together so the cut line is right at the cut line, so you're not trying to fill big voids, you know, with weld or anything like that. So you refer back to that video. Be a good one. Guys, we appreciate your time. Thanks for watching the video. If you like it, you know, like, subscribe, comment, more questions for us. You know, we love sharing this stuff with you guys. Don't forget, we sell a lot of awesome shirts.
Sweet shirts.
Somewhere down below the videos, probably a whole line of them. Check it out.
If there's anything we talked about in this video that you want to go more in depth on, we can do that. We can do multiple videos going in depth. We were just wanting to touch the surface of everything. Hopefully we could give you guys a little more insight on how we do things. Hopefully it helps you out. Hopefully it gives you the opportunity to make your projects what you want them to be.
All right, cool. Thanks, guys. See you next time.
See you next time.
Don't forget, buy a shirt.
Buy a shirt. Help the channel.
Like,
Buy a shirt.
subscribe, comment, more questions.
Chris, Jake, and Travis saying.
Yeah.
And Tim.
And Tim.
Don't forget to
Chris, Jake, and Travis, and Tim sent you.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Right.
Back to work.
Back to work.
Back to work.
Time to go home.
Get out of my AC. Get back in that hot shop.
soak it up on that.